At the public relations company in Toronto, I worked with a rather troubled lady who, unfortunately, had a drinking problem. One day she was very distressed and I asked if I could do anything to help. It turned out that the problem wasn't work-related, but was a personal family matter concerning her school-age children. Well, as good as my memory is, I honestly can't remember what I did to help her with her children. I'm sorry about that. I do know that it was during work hours and no one else knew about it. I didn't think at the time that I was doing anything exceptional. My colleague needed help and I showed up for her. In turn, though, she asked how she could help me. What would be your dream job, Marie? I told her that I wanted to work in television at the CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. It so happened that her husband was a big executive at the CBC, and she arranged an interview for me. He recommended me to the TV drama department where, amazingly, there was a vacancy for a personal assistant to the head of drama, John Hirsch. I managed to pass the pre-interview by 2 executives in the drama department, and the next day it was time to meet John Hirsch, who apparently had a reputation for being very volatile. He was quite an imposing Hungarian man who I found out later had lost his whole family in Auschwitz. He'd escaped from Hungary when he was 15 and eventually made his way to Canada. He'd suffered greatly and consequently had no time for fools. Even though he scared the life out of me, I knew I wanted the job. While I waited to hear, I used one of the valuable tools that I learned in PSI, creative visualization, to manifest the job I wanted. For instance, I imagined telling people that I worked at the CBC. I saw myself answering the phone, TV drama, John Hirsch's office. And within a couple of weeks, that's exactly what I was doing. I believed I was meant to be there, and it happened. Of course, it helped that I had the necessary skills of shorthand and typing. I could spell and had a decent knowledge of English. Also, having studied drama was an advantage. It was a perfect situation for me. When things fall into place, it really does feel that it was all meant to be. Yes, naturally, you have to have that belief, and sometimes it's almost as if you're believing in the unknown. But it all comes back to trusting that everything is going to work out for the best. It's having a positive attitude and a cheerful personality, being open to possibilities and not being afraid of change. Also doing the absolutely best job you can. It's true that the more you put into a job, the more you get out of it, and then unexpected opportunities come your way. Working in TV drama was very exciting, and I loved every minute of being in such a creative environment. As assistant to the head of drama, I was given an opportunity to learn all aspects of putting a TV show together, whether it was a sitcom, drama series or film. It all started with an idea, which was then written up as a proposal, and once given the green light, that's when the real work began. A writer or writers were assigned to assemble scripts, and producers met with John Hirsch and the production manager to determine what was needed to put the show together in terms of talent, locations, design, and so forth, and then what it was going to cost. That was usually the biggest hurdle. I realised pretty soon that working as John Hirsch's personal assistant was a very important and powerful job, mainly because I was the head gatekeeper. There were often times when writers and production staff came to me with a question for John. "He's in his office if you want to go in," I'd tell them. However, they preferred to use me as an intermediary and basically didn't want to deal with him because of his sometimes volatile nature. I knew how impatient John could be, and initially I was so fearful of asking him a question in case he thought I was stupid. His Hungarian accent could be thick at times, and I often misinterpreted his words when he was dictating a letter. One day I was having a particular problem reading my shorthand, and was agonising over it. I finally plucked up enough courage to go into John's office and ask him about the word that was giving me trouble. I think he could see that I was nervous and very sweetly said, "Oh, don't ever worry about coming to ask about anything. It's never a problem." Although he definitely kept me on my toes, from then on I began to understand him. He was just a human being, but because he'd endured great loss and suffering in his life, this had naturally affected his personality. Just as others, all of us really, are naturally affected by life experiences. It's all part of our growth. I was being influenced by people who were afraid of John for their own insecure reasons, instead of getting to know him on my own terms. I greatly admired John and eventually became very close to him and his partner Brian. They were like family to me. Whenever I need to parallel park my car, I think about John Hirsch, who had the patience to teach me that manoeuvre when I was learning to drive. "Take your time," he said. "Pay attention and don't worry who's behind you." As you can imagine, I met several famous actors, including Donald Sutherland, who was going to be appearing in a CBC TV film, playing the role of Norman Bethune, a renowned Canadian physician and political activist. Since he didn't have an assistant, Mr. Sutherland asked if I could help him out with a few letters, etc., which I did, of course. I told him I'd had a request from a brother and sister, aged 10 and 12, who lived north of Toronto and were big fans of the actor. They were asking for a signed photograph. "Surprisingly," he said, "why don't we invite them to the set?" I cleared it with the producer and director and invited the kids and their mother to the set the following week. Of course, they were thrilled. As so often happens in filming, schedules change, and the day the family were to visit the set, it wasn't particularly convenient. However, Donald told me to take them back to his suite at the Four Seasons Hotel and order lunch for them. The young fans and their mother were delighted to be in Donald Sutherland's penthouse suite and were very respectful of the luxurious surroundings. I don't think they actually ate a bite of food, though. Later, they did have a chance to briefly meet Donald back at the studio and got a signed photograph. He was also gracious enough to stay in touch with his young fans and sent them memorabilia from his roles in Fellini's Casanova and The Eagle Has Landed, which they proudly brought to the office to show me. It was so thoughtful of the actor, and it meant so much to these two children. I doubt they've ever forgotten Donald Sutherland's kindness. He was actually very encouraging to me when I talked about one day moving to the States and gave me his phone number, saying, "Call if you ever need anything." A few years later, when I'd landed in Los Angeles, I did call him for a favour, but for a Canadian friend, not for me. I asked if he'd be willing to record the voiceover for her documentary film. He was amiable and told me to contact his agent, which of course was the right thing to do. I never spoke to Donald Sutherland again until 15 years later, when we both appeared in the film Disclosure. We were having our makeup done at the same time, and I reintroduced myself. He had no clue who I was, even after I'd reminded him of our meeting at the CBC when he was filming Bethune. I'd mentioned the sad loss of John Hirsch, who died 6 years previously from AIDS, but he didn't seem to be too interested in pursuing the conversation. I decided not to thank him for the kindness he'd shown to the brother and sister in Toronto. Perhaps I should have done. It might have made a difference. Even though it was a real blow to my ego, I also realised that I needed to respect his space while he was preparing to play his role in the film. Well, at least I'm giving him that excuse. As mentioned earlier, we're all human beings carrying our own personal baggage, and whenever we might feel offended by someone's words or actions, we need to appreciate the road they're travelling with those bags. Next time, sitting on Maggie Smith's lap. Thanks for listening.